Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The pen hovered above the insurance form when I heard her voice. He forgets things all the time now, my daughter-in-law told the bank manager, softly sliding a paper across the counter. His doctor confirmed early dementia. We just want to make sure his assets are protected. The manager frowned, scanning the paper, my doctor's note, my forged signature. My blood froze. For a moment I forgot to breathe. The woman speaking wasn't a stranger. She was my son's wife, the same one who called me Dad, who hugged me at holidays. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish her lie. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. As she walked out, confident and smiling, I stayed seated, an old man holding a pen and a secret. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. They think I'm losing my mind. They're about to learn how dangerous it is to underestimate it. I waited until Megan's heels disappeared down the hallway before lowering the pen. The bank smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish, the kind of scent that never changes no matter how many years pass. Mr. Dalton, the manager, adjusted his glasses nervously, pretending not to notice the tension still hanging in the air. Mr. Whitman, shall we continue with the forms? Yes, I said calmly, though my pulse was still hammering in my ears. Let's finish this. He nodded, sliding the remaining documents toward me. I signed each page with deliberate precision, my handwriting steady, defying the lie she'd just told. When we were done, he thanked me and hesitated. His eyes betrayed pity. I'd seen that look before, when people don't know whether they're looking at a victim or a fool. As I left the bank, the autumn sunlight seemed colder than usual. Outside, Megan's silver SUV was parked crookedly near the exit. She was leaning on the hood, scrolling through her phone, as if nothing in the world could touch her. I didn't approach her. Instead, I walked straight past, briefcase in hand, my shadow long and unwavering on the pavement. Charleston was beautiful that afternoon. The oaks along the street were shedding their last golden leaves, scattering them across the brick sidewalks. I passed by familiar storefronts, the old bakery Linda used to love, the bookstore where I'd bought my first retirement novel. Every corner whispered memories of a quieter time back when family meant comfort, not deception. By the time I reached home, the anger had cooled into something sharper clarity. The white colonial house stood quietly behind its wrought iron gate, the same house Linda and I had bought 40 years ago. It was worth $2 million now, but no price could capture the years of labor and laughter it contained. To think someone I had welcomed into my family could see it only as an asset made my stomach turn. I hung my coat on the rack and poured a glass of water, my reflection staring back from the kitchen window. My late wife used to say, Henry numbers never lie, but people do. She was right. I'd built a career in accounting. I knew a forgery when I saw one. That paper Megan handed over at the bank was no different from a counterfeit check, just more personal. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Ryan. Hey, Dad, he began lightly, too casually. Did Megan meet you at the bank today? Yes, I replied, my tone even. That's great. She's been worried about you, keeping up with all that paperwork. You know how confusing insurance renewals can get, especially... He hesitated, then softened his voice. At your age. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch, not in amusement, but disbelief. I'm perfectly capable of reading what I sign, Ryan. He chuckled nervously. Of course. I didn't mean anything by it. We just want to help. You've been under stress lately. Forgetting small things, it happens. I'm not forgetting anything. I said flatly. There was silence on the line. Then he sighed. "We're just trying to look out for you, Dad. That's all." "Then don't look down on me," I said quietly, and ended the call. I stood there for a long while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The same clock Linda had insisted on keeping, even when it stopped working for weeks. "It's not broken," she used to say, "it just needs patience." I smiled faintly. Maybe she'd been talking about more than the clock. That evening I went to my study and unlocked the oak drawer beneath the window. Inside was a small safe, its metal cold beneath my fingers. I turned the dial 4/22/19, the date Linda and I married. The door clicked open, revealing the neatly stacked documents, property deed, insurance papers, health records. I ran my hand across the pages, familiar and fragile, the proof of a lifetime's work. If Megan and Ryan thought I was too old to protect what was mine, they were about to learn the depth of my memory. I had copies of every major document, every bank transfer, every signature from the last 20 years. Some men hoarded antiques or guns. I hoarded proof. I spent the next hour sorting through papers, looking for anything that might connect Megan to the bank account or to my doctor. The medical note she'd shown was signed by Dr. Hanley. I'd never met anyone by that name in my life. My physician was Dr. Howard, and I had an appointment with him next week. That would be the first stop. By 9 p.m., I had compiled a small pile labeled "Suspect." I locked it in a separate drawer and sat back in my chair. Outside, the crickets had started their nightly symphony. The house felt too big, too quiet. For years it had been filled with family dinners, laughter, birthdays. Now it echoed with only the sound of the past and the low hum of betrayal. I went to the living room and looked at the framed photo above the fireplace, Ryan at 15, holding a baseball bat, grinning proudly. I'd missed games, stayed late at the office to afford his equipment, his college, his wedding. I'd given him everything except the discipline to value it. Somewhere along the way, I had mistaken providing for teaching. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Dad Megan's voice drifted in light and syrupy. I didn't answer immediately. She knocked again. "I thought I'd drop by to see if you got home safe." The bank can be confusing with all that paperwork. I opened the door. Her smile was perfect rehearsed. She carried a small folder in one hand. "You left this in the car," she said, holding it up. "Dr. Hanley's medical note, remember?" I looked her dead in the eye. "No, I don't." Her smile faltered. "Oh, well, maybe you forgot. You've had a lot on your mind. Not as much as you think," I said, stepping aside so she could leave. She lingered a moment, scanning the hallway behind me, as if gauging what she might one day own. Then she placed the folder on the entry table. "Just trying to help," she said sweetly. When she was gone, I shut the door, locked it, and opened the folder. Inside was the same forged note stamped, dated perfectly fake. I took out my phone and photographed every page carefully, then placed it back exactly as she'd left it. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the dark yard. The oak trees swayed under the dim porch light, their shadows crawling across the grass. My late wife's voice echoed in my mind again. "Never fight emotion with emotion, Henry. Use the facts." I opened a notebook and began to write dates, names, words. I'd overheard everything that mattered. This time, there would be no pleading, no shouting, no tears. There would be numbers, evidence, and truth. When the clock struck midnight, I closed the notebook and locked it away. I walked to the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass. My reflection looked older, yes, but not weaker. "If they think I'm losing my mind," I murmured, "then they've forgotten who taught them how to use theirs." Tomorrow, I would visit Dr. Howard, then the bank, then an old friend who knew more about legal forensics than anyone in Charleston. I wasn't sure how long it would take, but I'd already made my first move. And this time I wasn't playing defense. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the bank was the smell of new paint and air conditioning. It was the same branch I'd been using for 20 years, the same friendly staff, the same morning routine, except this time it didn't feel like mine anymore. I was there to update my insurance policy, a small formality I'd been putting off for months. My doctor said I was in good health, my finances were stable, and everything was supposed to be simple. But that morning would change everything I thought I knew about my family. I greeted the teller, a young man who smiled politely, and asked me to take a seat while they prepared my documents. The bank manager, Claire, recognized me and waved from her glass office. I'd known her since she was an intern, a bright young woman with a steady head for numbers. "Morning, Mr. Whitman," she called out. "Give me just a few minutes to pull up your file." I nodded, grateful for familiar faces. For a man in his 70s, stability meant everything. As I waited, I heard a voice that froze me mid-breath. "Yes, I'm here to finalize the paperwork for Mr. Whitman's insurance." The tone was soft but rehearsed, polished with false concern. I knew that voice. It was Megan, my daughter-in-law. I turned slightly in my chair, hidden behind a column near the waiting area. She stood at the counter, elegant as ever, her blonde hair pulled back neatly, her pearl earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. The teller handed her a clipboard, and she smiled like she was doing something noble. "My father-in-law's not well," she said softly. "He forgets things sometimes, even where he lives. I'm just helping him handle the details before it's too late." Every word hit me like a hammer. My hands went cold. Claire came out of her office with a folder, glancing between Megan and the teller. "I wasn't aware Mr. Whitman needed assistance," she said carefully. Megan leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound confidential. "We just found out recently. Early cognitive decline according to his doctor. He even tried to sign some insurance documents twice last week." Claire frowned, uncertain. "Do you have documentation?" Megan reached into her designer purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Of course. Here's the note from Dr. Sullivan," she said, handing it over. "And here's the power of attorney he signed." Claire studied the document. I could see her expression change first. Confusion, then discomfort. My eyes caught the faint blue stamp on the bottom corner of the form. My name was there, my signature too, only slightly off, just enough that someone who knew me might notice it wasn't mine. I felt my heartbeat echo in my ears. For a moment I couldn't move. My own daughter-in-law was standing a few feet away, calmly dismantling my life with forged paper and a perfect smile. "Of course everything is confidential," Megan continued. "Ryan and I just want what's best for him. He doesn't need to worry about financial matters at his age. It's too stressful." Claire nodded slowly. "I understand, Mrs. Whitman. I'll have to verify these documents through our legal department before making any changes." "Of course," Megan said sweetly. "Take your time. We just want him safe." I turned away before she could see me. My legs felt weak as I walked quietly out the door, pretending to check my phone. The bright Florida sun outside felt blinding. My breath came in shallow bursts, my mind a storm of disbelief and rage. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before I could even start the engine. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I had faced betrayal before colleagues, business partners, but never from within my own family. I'd trusted Ryan and Megan completely. I'd paid for their first home, their wedding, even helped with their children's college funds. And now they were planning to take everything from me while I was still breathing. I drove aimlessly for a while, my thoughts scattered, until instinct brought me back home. My house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like enemy territory. I went straight to the study, pulled open my drawer, and took out every legal paper I could find. Insurance, property deeds, financial statements. I spread them across the desk and stared at the signatures. Mine strong, deliberate, consistent. The one I'd seen at the bank was close, but the angle of the H in Henry had been wrong. Too flat. Too practiced. I needed help. Not from Ryan, not from anyone connected to them. Someone who would believe me and know what to do. My eyes landed on a business card tucked inside a book on the shelf. Nora Gates, legal consultant. I'd met her years ago through Tom Lawson, my old friend and former lawyer. Nora had once handled elder fraud cases for the state before starting her own firm. I called her. She answered on the third ring. Henry Whitman, she said, her tone surprised, but warm. It's been a while. What's going on? I need to see you. I said, my voice lower than usual. It's urgent. It's about my family. There was a pause. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring whatever you have. And Henry, don't sign anything tonight. Not a single paper. That night, sleep didn't come. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the dark swallow the garden. The oak tree outside swayed in the wind, the same one I'd planted 40 years ago with my wife Linda. I remembered her laugh. Her hands covered in soil, her saying, "This house will keep us safe long after we're gone." Now even that promise was being stolen. I thought about Ryan, my only son. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped calling just to talk. Every conversation had turned into a transaction. Dad, can you help with this? Dad, it's just a temporary loan. Dad, you know you're the only one I can count on. And each time I'd said yes, thinking I was helping, not feeding his greed. Around midnight, I made myself a cup of tea and sat back at the desk. I opened a new notebook and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. If they want proof of my weakness, I'll give them proof of their crimes. Then I started a list: names, dates, copies of emails, the bank branch address, even the description of Megan's fake doctor's note. Every small detail mattered. If they wanted to take everything, they'd have to do it under the eye of the law, and this time the law would be mine. The next morning, I arrived at Nora's office early. She was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and that steady look she always had when she was about to solve something impossible. Tell me everything, she said. I told her about the bank, the forged documents, the conversation, the doctor's note. Her pen moved quickly across the notepad. When I finished, she looked up, her expression unreadable. Henry, what they're doing is serious, felony level. But it's also delicate. You can't confront them yet. I wasn't planning to, I said. She nodded approvingly. Good, because we'll need them to make one more move. Let them believe they're safe. Let them believe you're slipping. Why? Because once they get comfortable, they'll incriminate themselves. And we'll be ready. I leaned back in my chair, a calm settling over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity instead of confusion. Nora slid a small recording device across the desk. Start keeping this with you. Every visit, every call, every word they say. Truth is only as strong as the evidence behind it. I took it, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Small, silver, ordinary, but powerful. When I drove home that day, the fear had shifted into focus. I wasn't the helpless old man they thought I was. I was the man who'd built his life brick by brick, who'd survived loss and betrayal before, and I was still standing. As I parked in front of my house, I saw Ryan's car in the driveway. He was leaning against it, smiling casually, as if the world hadn't just started to unravel. Hey, Dad, he called out. Megan told me you've been acting confused lately. You okay? I smiled back, my voice calm. Just fine, son. Better than ever. He nodded clearly, relieved by my composure. Good to hear. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. I stepped closer, looking him in the eye. You always do, don't you? He didn't notice the pen in my pocket was already recording. That night I wrote another line in my notebook beneath the first. They think they're saving me. What they don't know is I'm already saving the evidence. At 70, people expect you to forget things, names, dates, conversations. That week, I pretended to forget everything. When Megan asked if I remembered our doctor's appointment, I nodded vaguely. When Ryan mentioned the new insurance forms, I smiled and said, "You'll handle it, son." They thought I was surrendering. They didn't notice the small recording pen in my shirt pocket or the hidden camera disguised as a clock in my living room. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was building a case, and every lie they told became another line of evidence. I spent the next few days rehearsing weakness. I left the television on static, misplaced my glasses on purpose, and even forgot my own birth date once during breakfast with Ryan. He looked at Megan, and she gave him that smug nod that said, "See, it's working." I smiled to myself, stirring sugar into my coffee, letting them believe they were in control. They didn't notice the new device on the bookshelf, a digital clock with a camera lens, no bigger than a pen tip, blinking red once before disappearing into the shadows. The first time Megan came by alone, she brought a laptop and a folder saying she was there to help me sort my finances. She was dressed for business, ivory blouse, pearl earrings, and that perfume she wore when she wanted to sound trustworthy. "Don't worry, Dad," she said, using the word dad like a scalpel. "I'll just check a few things for you. The insurance company needs some verification before finalizing your benefits." I nodded, watching her from the corner of my eye as she typed quickly. She thought I couldn't see the small flash drive she slid into my USB port. My hidden camera saw everything. The files she opened, the ones she copied, and the way her smile twitched each time she saw my account balances. "You've always been so careful with your money," she said sweetly. "It's good that you trust us to handle things now." "Trust is earned, Megan," I said softly. "You must have worked very hard for it." She hesitated, a flicker of doubt passing through her eyes, but quickly recovered. "Of course. That's what family is for." When she left, I waited 5 minutes before moving. My hands didn't shake as I opened the recycle bin on the laptop and found the remnants of her work, a temporary folder she forgot to delete. Inside were scans of my deed bank statements and something else, a half-completed form titled Medical Guardianship Consent. The name Dr. Sullivan appeared again, along with a forged signature that looked almost like mine. Almost. I printed a copy and slipped it into an envelope labeled Evidence 01. That night, I called Tom Lawson, my old friend and retired attorney. He picked up on the second ring, his voice rough with age but still sharp. "Henry, you sound like a man about to make trouble." "Not trouble," I said quietly. "Justice. I need your help." We met the next morning at a diner we'd frequented for decades, back when our wives were still alive and our sons were still boys. Tom listened without interrupting as I told him everything: the forged signature, the power of attorney, Megan's little performance at the bank. He stirred his coffee slowly, then leaned back. "You're playing this right?" he said finally. "Stay quiet. Let them walk themselves into the hole. I'll call someone who owes me a favor." That someone turned out to be Nora Gates, a name I'd already written down in my notebook. When she walked into Tom's office later that afternoon, she looked as calm as she did the first time we'd met. "Mr. Whitman," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I hear you've decided not to be a victim anymore." "I've decided to pay attention," I replied. Over the next hour, we built a plan. Nora would verify the forgery with her contacts in the bank's fraud division, while Tom handled the legal groundwork for asset protection. In the meantime, I would keep recording. Every word, every visit, every whisper. "The moment they mention your mental health again, make sure that pen is on," Nora said. "And keep playing the part of the confused old man. It's your best weapon." I returned home that evening and reviewed the footage from the camera clock. Megan's every move was there, the flash drive insertion, her fake smiles, even her muttered comment when she thought she was alone. "He won't remember a thing." I saved the footage in a locked drive Nora had set up for me. She called it the fortress. It automatically backed up everything to an encrypted server. I didn't understand how it worked, but I trusted her. 2 days later, Ryan stopped by unexpectedly. He brought dinner from my favorite Italian restaurant, something he hadn't done in years. "Thought you could use a little company," he said casually, setting the food on the table. "Megan told me you've been forgetting to eat." "I have?" I asked, pretending to squint in confusion. "Well, that's not good." He smiled too warmly. "Don't worry, Dad. That's why we're here. We'll take care of things from now on." I pressed the record button in my pocket and leaned back. "You've always been good at taking care of things, son. Tell me, how's the business?" He hesitated before answering. "Rough couple of months, but nothing we can't handle. Once everything settles with your paperwork, we'll be fine." "My paperwork, yeah, just, the insurance and property stuff." "Megan's handling it." I nodded slowly, giving him enough rope to hang himself. "She's a smart woman. I'm lucky to have her." "You are," he said, smiling faintly. When he left that night, I didn't follow him to the door. I sat there listening to the echo of his words. He wasn't even trying to hide the manipulation anymore. The subtle care in his tone had turned into quiet control. Later, I walked into the garden and stood under the oak tree Linda and I had planted. The air was cool, the kind of evening that once made me grateful to be alive. But now, all I felt was distance. Between me and my son. Between who we were and who we'd become. Inside, I reviewed the audio from the night's dinner. Ryan's voice was steady but calculating. At one point he said, "Dad, you can trust Megan and me to handle everything. You just need to sign where we tell you." I stopped the playback and sat in silence. The pen recorder blinked once before turning off. I saved the file as Exhibit 02. The next morning I received a message from Claire at the bank. It was short, cautious. "Mr. Whitman, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but something about your daughter-in-law's visit didn't sit right with me." The doctor's note she brought looked off. "Be careful, please." I typed back, "Thank you, Claire. Keep that thought safe. You might need it later." That evening I sat at my desk going through each recording. Labeling, dating, cross-referencing. The notebook beside me had grown thick with notes and underlined words. Doctor's note. Forged signature. USB transfer. The evidence was no longer fragments, it was a web, and I was the spider at its center. Yet in the quiet moments, the loneliness crept in. Revenge didn't feel like power, it felt like survival. I missed Linda. I missed the version of Ryan that laughed with me over burnt barbecue and fishing trips. I missed believing that family meant safety. I opened my journal and wrote, "If family turns into strangers, then truth will be my only kin." A few days later, Megan came by again, smiling too brightly. "Just wanted to drop off groceries," she said, walking into the kitchen without asking. She reached into her purse while I pretended to fix the sink. I watched from the reflection of the chrome faucet as she pulled out her phone, snapped photos of some papers on the counter, and slipped them back. Those papers weren't real. They were decoys, a fabricated will I'd written myself with Nora's guidance. The signature had a deliberate flaw, one that would make any forgery tied to it invalid in court. I'd left it there to see if she'd bite. As soon as she left, I checked the footage. The camera caught everything, the photos, the smirk, the whisper she made to herself. Perfect. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. She thought she was stealing my future, I murmured. In truth, she was signing her own confession. The first sign that things were about to escalate came on a Wednesday morning when I received a letter from the insurance company. It wasn't addressed to me, but to Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Whitman, guardians of Henry Whitman. Guardians. The word hit me like a strike to the chest. I stared at it for a long time, the edges of the paper trembling in my hand. That wasn't just arrogance, it was legal preparation. They were getting ready to take everything piece by piece until I didn't even exist on paper anymore. I called Nora immediately. She answered before the second ring. "Bring it to me," she said. "Don't call Ryan. Don't say a word to anyone." Her voice had that sharpness I'd come to trust. By noon, I was sitting in her office while she read the letter, her expression growing darker with every line. "They're setting up a guardianship petition," she said finally. "They'll use that forged doctor's note as proof you're mentally unfit to manage your finances. Once it's approved, you'll lose access to your accounts and property. Everything will be under their control." I leaned back in the chair, forcing my breathing to steady. "Then we need to prove the note is fake before they can file anything." Nora nodded. "I have a contact in the medical licensing board. Dr. Sullivan's signature can be verified. But we'll need more than just that. We need to catch them acting on the forgery. Once they try to use it officially, it becomes a criminal act. Then we wait," I said. "And I'll keep recording." She handed me a small box. Inside was a new pen recorder, sleeker and stronger than the first. "They'll make mistakes, Henry," she said. "People always do when they think they've already won." That evening, I drove back home in the rain. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, puddles flashing like mirrors. My house felt smaller than usual, as if the walls were closing in. When I stepped inside, the phone was ringing. It was Ryan. "Dad," he said, his voice too cheerful. "We've been talking, Megan and I, and we think it's time we helped you sort some things out. You've got too much paperwork lying around. It's confusing." "I manage fine," I said calmly. "I know you think that," he replied gently, patronizingly. "But Megan found out you signed 2 copies of the same insurance form last month. She's worried." I almost laughed. "She worries a lot, doesn't she?" "It's because she cares," he said. "Listen, Dad, we just want to help. Maybe we can meet tomorrow and go through your files together." "Tomorrow's not good," I replied. "I have plans." There was a pause on the line. "Plans?" He repeated, his tone sharp. "Yes," I said, letting silence stretch. "I'm meeting someone to discuss my financial health." He hesitated, but I could feel his unease. "Who?" "A professional," I said simply, then ended the call. That night I sat in my study and listened to the rain against the windows. My desk was covered in files, the evidence I'd been collecting. I labeled each folder carefully. Bank recordings, fake medical note, USB copy, guardianship draft. Every folder was a piece of the trap tightening around them. Around midnight, I heard a car door slam outside. I went to the window and saw Ryan's SUV parked across the street. Its headlights were off, but I could see the faint glow of a phone screen inside. I turned off my lamp, sat down, and waited. 20 minutes later, the car drove away. The next day, I went to see Nora again. Her contact had already confirmed it. The signature on the doctor's note was fake. "The real Dr. Sullivan hasn't practiced medicine for over a year," she said. "His license expired. That document Megan showed the bank is worthless." "Worthless for her," I said, "but valuable for us." Nora smiled faintly. "Exactly. Now all we have to do is let her use it again." 2 days later, Megan gave me the opportunity. She arrived unannounced, her voice sugary at the door. "Dad, I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to bring over your new insurance paperwork. It's time sensitive." She was getting sloppy. Desperation always looks like generosity. I invited her in and motioned for her to sit. "What's this about?" "Oh, it's just routine," she said, handing me a stack of forms. "They need your signature on these. I've already filled in the details. It's much easier this way." I glanced at the papers. Half the text was blacked out with sticky notes marked, "Sign here." The language underneath was legal jargon, something about financial authorization and medical proxy. You've really done your homework, I said, picking up the pen recorder in my pocket and clicking it on. I don't know how I'd manage without you. She smiled, thinking she had me. You don't have to thank me, Dad. We're just looking out for you. I pretended to squint at the fine print. So, once I sign this, what happens? Oh, nothing much, she said lightly. It just lets us handle your bank stuff, medical appointments, small things. It's just for convenience. And I stay in control, right? Of course, she said, her smile tightening for a second before softening again. Her phone buzzed, and I caught a glimpse of Ryan's name flashing on the screen. She silenced it quickly and looked at me. Just sign on the last page, please. I held the pen for a moment, letting the silence stretch. You know, Megan, I said slowly. Linda always told me never to sign anything when I was tired. Her smile faltered. It's just a form. And I'm just an old man, I said. Surely it can wait. Her tone sharpened. If we delay, it might complicate the insurance. I stood up, walking toward the window. Then, let it be complicated. I've lived long enough to know that what's easy isn't always right. For the first time since all this began, she lost her composure. You don't understand what's at stake, she snapped. I turned slowly. I understand perfectly. The only thing I don't understand is how you thought I wouldn't notice. Her mouth opened, then closed. She gathered the papers quickly. You're confused, she said stiffly. Ryan was right. You really need help. I didn't reply. I just watched her leave her heels clicking on the floor like the ticking of a clock running out of time. The moment the door closed, I sat down and checked the pen. It had recorded every word. The file was clear, her voice, her admission, her tone. Evidence, Lazaro 4. That night, Tom called. You've got her, he said. This is enough to bury the guardianship petition before it's filed. I don't want to bury it, I said. I want it exposed. I want them to file to think they're winning, and then I want the truth to hit them like a train. Tom laughed softly. You always did like poetic justice. Justice isn't poetic, I said. It's math. You balance what was taken. Later, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, the night air cool and still. Across the yard, the oak tree swayed its branches, whispering against the dark. I thought of Linda again, of how she used to say, "There's power in patience, Henry." She was right. Patience was the sharpest blade. Before going to bed, I wrote one more line in my notebook. They think I'm fading, but I've never seen more clearly. The next morning, Nora called with the final confirmation. The evidence package was ready. The real Dr. Sullivan had agreed to testify that his signature was forged. The legal clock had started ticking. Once they submit the guardianship, it'll be the last thing they ever sign freely, she said. I looked out the window, the morning sun cutting through the curtains, bright and merciless. Let them file, I said quietly. I'll be waiting. 2 days later, the guardianship petition was filed. I found out not from my son or daughter-in-law, but from a notice delivered by courier, a thick envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside were pages of legal jargon declaring that I, Henry Whitman, was no longer of sound mind and unfit to manage personal or financial affairs. My name appeared beside words like incompetent, mentally declining, vulnerable adult. The petitioners Ryan and Megan Whitman. My own family. For a long time I didn't move. I sat at the kitchen table staring at those words, feeling their weight settle like chains on my chest. I'd expected manipulation, lies, even deceit, but this was betrayal written in ink, filed in court, public and permanent. I could already hear the whispers of neighbors when the case became official. Poor old Henry. Lost his mind. His family had to step in. But Nora had been right. They had made their move, and that meant it was my turn. I called her office immediately. They filed it, I said simply. I know, she replied. The clerk's office notified me the moment it came through. Don't worry, Henry. This is exactly what we needed. It's game time now. Within the hour, I was sitting in Nora's office, the petition spread out between us. She'd already highlighted key sections, fabricated medical statements, false witness names, even a letter supposedly from Dr. Sullivan verifying my mental decline. "Look here," she said, tapping the bottom of one page. "They used a notary stamp registered to Megan's cousin in Orlando. He's not authorized to notarize anything outside his jurisdiction. That's fraud stacked on top of forgery." I looked at her, my voice steady. "Can we prove it?" "Oh, we can do better than that," she said with a small smile. "We can destroy their credibility in one hearing." Tom joined us via video call, leaning back in his chair, cigar in hand. "Henry, I spoke with the presiding judge, an old colleague of mine. He's agreed to expedite the hearing due to the nature of the petition. You'll have your day in court next week. Until then, keep calm and keep recording." "I've got plenty," I said. "More than they know." That night, I prepared my house like a war room. Every file was organized, labeled, and sealed in separate folders. I'd backed up all audio and video recordings onto 2 encrypted drives, one hidden in the vent behind my desk, another in a safety deposit box. The phone rang around 8. It was Ryan. "Dad," he began, sounding calm and almost rehearsed. "I don't want you to be upset when you get the court papers. This isn't an attack. It's just to protect you." "Protect me," I said softly. "By declaring me insane." He sighed dramatically. "We had no choice. Megan said the bank called her again, something about you mixing up your insurance forms. You've been acting strange lately." "You mean thinking for myself, Dad? Please," he said, lowering his voice. "You're confused. You've been through a lot since Mom passed. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." I smiled faintly, knowing the recorder was capturing every word. "You've always been good at taking care of things, son. You and Megan, you take care of everything." There was a pause on the line. Then cautiously he said, "You're not planning to fight this, are you? It's really for your own good." "I'm too tired to fight," I lied. "Do whatever you think is best." "Good," he said, relief flooding his tone. "We'll handle it. Trust us." When I hung up, I sat there for a long while, listening to the echo of his last words. Trust us. They'd used that phrase my entire life, and for the first time it felt like an invitation to their downfall. The next morning, I visited the courthouse with Nora to file my counterclaim. The staff there treated me with the polite pity reserved for elderly men who'd lost control of their families. I could almost read their thoughts, another old man duped by greed. If only they knew. As we walked out of the courthouse, Nora handed me a copy of our official response. "Now it's public record," she said. "They can't back out without making themselves look guilty." "What happens next?" I asked. "They'll double down," she replied. "People like Megan always do. They'll bring fake witnesses, exaggerated stories, whatever it takes to make you look weak. You just stay calm and let the evidence speak." That afternoon, Megan showed up at my house uninvited, carrying a basket of muffins and her most practiced smile. "Dad," she said sweetly, stepping inside as if nothing had happened. "We don't want things to get ugly. This is just paperwork, nothing personal." "Of course," I said, motioning her toward the kitchen. "Coffees?" She hesitated but nodded. As she sat at the table, I noticed her eyes flicking toward my desk, the same place where I'd once signed countless checks and transfers for Ryan's business. She couldn't help herself. She always looked for control. "Ryan's worried about you." She continued, her tone dripping with false concern. "He's not sleeping. He keeps saying you don't trust him anymore." "Trust is earned," I said quietly, pouring her coffee. "I understand," she said, forcing a smile. But families go through hard times. Once this guardianship thing is settled, you'll see how much easier life gets. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. You really think I'm not in my right mind? Her smile froze. It's not about that. It's about safety. For you or for me? She looked away, sipping her coffee to hide the tremor in her hand. The recorder pen sat between us on the table, disguised as a ballpoint I'd been using to jot grocery lists. When she finally left, I played back the audio, marking every line where she contradicted herself. By the end, I had over 20 incriminating statements in less than half an hour. I labeled it Exhibit 07, Megan Incriminating Conversation Kitchen. 3 days before the hearing, Nora called with good news. The bank manager, Claire, has agreed to testify, she said. She'll confirm Megan presented a fake medical document. That's the nail in their coffin. I exhaled tension, leaving my body for the first time in weeks. Does she know what she's walking into? She does, Nora said. She also said she's never forgotten the look on Megan's face when she lied about your condition. She's been waiting for this. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed across the sky. I thought of Linda again, of the promise I'd made to her the night before she passed. Take care of Ryan. I'd kept that promise longer than I should have. Maybe this was my way of finally keeping it the right way, by saving him from himself. The day before the hearing, I received one last call from Ryan. His voice was sharp, the charm gone. You've made a mistake, Dad, he said. Once this goes to court, people will know you're not well. You'll embarrass yourself. Maybe, I said. But at least I'll be the one standing when it's over. You're going to regret this, he hissed. I already do, I said, and hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room, every step echoing off the hardwood floor. Tomorrow everything would change. Win or lose, there would be no going back to family dinners or polite phone calls. The bridge had burned long before I'd struck the match. At midnight, I walked into the garden and stood beneath the oak tree. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, painting the grass in silver. I whispered into the quiet, "Tomorrow, Linda, I'll make them tell the truth." When dawn came, I dressed in my best gray suit, the one I wore at Ryan's wedding. It felt symbolic. One last performance before the curtain dropped. As I locked the front door, I glanced back at the house one final time. Every photo, every memory, every scar this family had given me, all of it, would serve its purpose today. By 9 o'clock, I was standing outside the courthouse with Nora at my side. She looked at me and smiled faintly. Ready, I straightened my tie, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost and everything I was about to reclaim. Let's make them kneel, I said. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and tension. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the scrape of shoes, the low murmur of spectators, seemed amplified. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded neatly on the polished surface, pretending calm while my heart pounded like a drum. Ryan and Megan were across the room, whispering to their lawyer, a slick man in a navy suit who smiled too easily. They looked confident, almost smug. They thought this was already over. The judge, a gray-haired man with deep lines of patience etched into his face, entered the room. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Everyone rose, then sat again. The lawyer stood immediately. Your Honor, we represent Ryan and Megan Whitman, petitioners, seeking guardianship over Mr. Henry Whitman, who, due to cognitive decline, can no longer make rational decisions regarding his financial and personal well-being. He spoke the words as if he were reading a grocery list. Every syllable was rehearsed, every gesture meant to appear sincere. He handed over a folder thick with documents, the same ones Nora and I had already examined. I caught Megan's faint smile as she glanced at me, her expression a mix of pity and triumph. The judge flipped through the papers and adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Whitman," he said, looking up at me, "how do you respond to these allegations?" I stood slowly. "I respond, Your Honor, that the only cognitive decline happening here is moral." A few people chuckled quietly in the back. The judge lifted a brow. "Proceed carefully, Mr. Whitman." "Yes, Your Honor." I nodded and sat again as Nora rose beside me. Her voice was steady, professional, yet carried that undercurrent of steel I'd come to rely on. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that not only is Mr. Whitman fully capable of managing his affairs, but that this petition is part of an orchestrated attempt by his son and daughter-in-law to defraud him of his assets through forgery and coercion." The lawyer scoffed. "That's an outrageous claim." "Then you won't mind if we let the evidence speak?" Nora replied. She handed the clerk a flash drive and a stack of exhibits. The clerk connected the drive to the screen mounted beside the bench. The first image appeared Megan at the bank, smiling politely at the teller handing over a document. The timestamp and bank logo were clearly visible. "This footage was obtained legally," Nora said, "courtesy of the branch manager who will testify shortly. Note the document Mrs. Whitman presents, purportedly a medical note signed by Dr. Sullivan stating that my client is mentally unfit." Megan shifted in her seat. Ryan frowned. Now Nora continued clicking to the next slide. It was the same document magnified to show the signature. "We've contacted the Florida Medical Licensing Board, who confirmed Dr. Sullivan's license expired over a year before this was dated. Furthermore, we have Dr. Sullivan himself present today to testify that he neither wrote nor signed this note." The lawyer was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence was not included in discovery." "Because your clients forged it," Nora said calmly. The judge raised a hand. "Overruled. Proceed." The courtroom fell silent. Megan's face turned pale, and she glanced nervously at Ryan. He whispered something sharp under his breath, but she ignored him. Dr. Sullivan, a man in his 60s, with a gentle voice, took the stand next. He identified the document and confirmed it was fake. "That's not my handwriting. I never evaluated Mr. Whitman. In fact, I haven't practiced medicine since my retirement last year." The lawyer tried to recover. "So it's possible someone else used your signature without your knowledge." "It's not just possible, it's exactly what happened," Dr. Sullivan said firmly. When he stepped down, Claire, the bank manager, replaced him on the stand. She testified about Megan's visit, about how she'd presented the false papers, and how uneasy she'd felt afterward. "Mr. Whitman has been a client of ours for 2 decades, she said. "He's always been sharp, polite, and organized. I didn't believe for a second that he'd lost his mental faculties." Ryan's lawyer shifted tactics, his tone turning sympathetic. "Mrs. Whitman, surely you don't think Megan had bad intentions? Isn't it possible she was just trying to help?" Claire looked straight at him. "People don't forge medical notes to help," she said. "They do it to take something that isn't theirs." The judge scribbled a note. Ryan and Megan sat stiffly, their confidence draining away with every word. When it was my turn to take the stand, Nora gave me a nod. I walked up steady but slow, letting the silence stretch. The lawyer tried to smile at me, but I could see the irritation in his eyes. "Mr. Whitman," he began smoothly, "your son and daughter-in-law claim you've been confused lately, forgetting dates, misplacing things, even repeating yourself. Is that true?" "Of course," I said. "Everyone forgets things sometimes. Like how Ryan forgot the $20,000 I lent him last spring, or how Megan forgot to mention she was recording our conversations without consent." Nora clicked the next file on the screen. The courtroom filled with Megan's voice, clear as day. "He won't remember a thing. It's perfect." Megan gasped. Ryan turned red. The lawyer opened his mouth, but found no words. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Is that Mrs. Whitman's voice?" "Yes, Your Honor," Nora said. recorded by my client with time-stamped verification. We also have phone records showing multiple calls between Mrs. Whitman and the notary involved in the forgery. I looked at my son. "Ryan," I said softly, "why didn't you just ask me for help? Why do this?" For a moment he looked almost human again. His jaw clenched, his eyes uncertain. But Megan whispered something in his ear, and the mask returned. Their lawyer tried one last desperate move. "Your Honor, this is a family matter, not a criminal one. Emotions are running high. Mistakes were made, but..." "Enough," the judge interrupted. "I've heard enough." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady and cold. "This court finds that the petition for guardianship is not only baseless, but fraudulent in nature. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the state attorney's office for investigation into forgery and attempted elder financial abuse." The gavel struck once sharp as a thunderclap. Court adjourned. The sound seemed to hang in the air. Megan's face went white as paper. Ryan buried his head in his hands. As people began to file out, the bailiffs approached them quietly, speaking into their radios. Nora turned to me with a small, proud smile. "You did it, Henry." "I didn't," I said softly. "The truth did." Outside the courthouse, the sun was blinding. Reporters were already gathering, shouting questions, cameras flashing. I ignored them, walking slowly down the steps, feeling each step like a release of years of guilt and silence. Behind me, I heard Megan's voice breaking for the first time. "Henry, please. We can fix this." I stopped halfway down the stairs and turned just enough to meet her eyes. "You tried to fix me out of my own life, Megan. I'm done being fixed." She reached for me, but the officers stepped between us. Ryan didn't even look up. By the time I reached the bottom of the steps, Tom was waiting beside Nora's car. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You made them kneel," he said quietly. I glanced back at the courthouse doors, where my son and his wife were being led away in handcuffs. "No," I said, exhaling. "They knelt to their own greed." That night I sat alone in my living room, the silence deep and still. The recordings, the documents, the evidence. It was all finished now. I poured myself a small drink and raised it toward Linda's photo on the mantel. "For once," I whispered, "I didn't disappoint you." The wind rustled the curtains, and for a brief second I thought I could almost hear her laugh, the sound of peace after a long, brutal war. The next morning the house felt different, quiet, but not the kind of silence that carried fear anymore. It was the calm that follows a storm, the kind of stillness that lets you breathe again. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to anxiety clawing at my chest. The court had spoken, and the truth had won. Yet even in victory, something inside me was heavy. You don't walk away from a battle like that without scars. I sat by the kitchen window, coffee steaming in my hands, staring at the garden Linda once loved. The roses had bloomed overnight, their petals open wide, as if the earth itself was celebrating. But even their beauty couldn't stop my thoughts from drifting back to Ryan. My son, my only child, had tried to destroy me. It was a truth that didn't fit neatly anywhere in my heart. The phone rang. I hesitated before answering. "Mr. Whitman." The voice was firm but professional. "This is Detective Harris with the Financial Crimes Division. We're handling the follow-up investigation on your son and daughter-in-law. Do you have a few minutes?" "Yes," I said quietly, though my stomach tightened. "We've collected additional evidence from the bank and your attorney, Ms. Gates. Based on what we have, both Mr. and Mrs. Whitman will be facing multiple charges: fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial abuse. We'll need your official statement this week." "I'll cooperate," I said. "Just tell me when." "Tomorrow morning at 10, he replied. "And Mr. Whitman, your courage in coming forward has helped us stop something that happens far too often. Most victims don't fight back." Victims. The word didn't sit right with me. I wasn't a victim anymore. After the call, I sat for a long time, the phone still in my hand. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger had burned away during those endless nights of planning and waiting. What was left now was something colder, quieter, acceptance maybe. The war was over. Now came the reckoning. Nora called later that afternoon. I just heard from the detective, she said. They'll likely arrest them again once the charges are finalized. You might want to prepare for a media storm. I don't care about the cameras, I replied. I just want it done. It will be, she promised. You've done everything right, Henry. Most people wouldn't have the strength. Strength. That was another word that didn't fit me the way it used to. I wasn't strong. I was simply tired of being weak. That evening, as the sun began to set, I walked outside. The air smelled of rain and earth. I stood under the oak tree, the same one Ryan used to climb when he was 10. I could still see him in my memory, skinny arms gripping the bark, shouting, "Watch me, Dad." I had watched him, proud and full of love, never imagining the man he would become. A soft knock at the gate pulled me back. When I turned, I saw a familiar figure, Megan. She stood there in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, no makeup, no arrogance left in her face. Her eyes were red from crying. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I just need 5 minutes." I didn't move at first. Every instinct screamed to turn her away. But something in her expression, shame maybe, made me nod. 5 minutes, I said, opening the gate. She stepped inside cautiously, her hands shaking. "They released me until the next hearing," she said softly. "Ryan's still in custody." "I know." Her lips quivered. He blames me for everything. Says I pushed him. Maybe I did. I thought we could fix our finances and it just went too far. But I swear, Henry, I never wanted to hurt you. I studied her face. There was fear there, yes, but also exhaustion. The same kind I'd seen in myself in the mirror after Linda died. The kind of fatigue that comes when you finally realize the lies have consumed everything. "I don't believe you wanted to hurt me," I said slowly. "But you did. And wanting isn't what matters. Actions do." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say I'm sorry." Her apology hung in the air like smoke. I nodded once. "Then say it to the court. Say it under oath. That's where it counts." She flinched but nodded. "I will." When she turned to leave, I stopped her. "Megan." She paused. "Ryan, he wasn't always like this. Do you remember that?" Her eyes softened for a moment. "Yes. Before the debts. Before he started hiding things. He wanted to be like you." That struck me harder than any insult could have. After she left, I went back inside and poured myself a drink. The whiskey burned, but it steadied me. I sat in the study and opened my notebook again. At the top of a new page, I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the final form of strength." But I didn't know yet if I was capable of it. The next morning, I arrived at the police station. Detective Harris greeted me with a firm handshake and a sympathetic smile. "We just need to go over a few details for the official record," he said, leading me to a small conference room. For the next 2 hours, I recounted everything from the first forged document to the final court ruling. He listened carefully, occasionally stopping to clarify dates or confirm evidence. When it was done, he closed his notebook. "You handled this better than most," he said. "Most people your age. They give up when it's family." "Maybe that's the problem," I said. "We confuse family with loyalty, even when the family's already betrayed us." He nodded. "You'll get justice, Mr. Whitman. I promise." When I left the station, the world felt lighter. I walked along the waterfront before heading home, the sea breeze carrying the salt and sound of gulls. There was peace in the rhythm of the waves, something constant and forgiving that I hadn't felt in years. That night, Nora called again. "Henry, I just got word the DA is pressing full charges. Megan's confession sealed it. Ryan will likely serve time." I was silent for a moment. "And her, she'll testify in exchange for leniency. It's the best she can do." "I see," I said quietly. "You did the right thing," Nora added. "You didn't just protect your assets, you exposed two people who would have done this to someone else eventually. You stopped the cycle." I looked at the oak tree outside its branches, silhouetted against the moonlight. "Maybe," I said. "But stopping a cycle doesn't heal what's broken." She was silent for a long moment. "Healing takes time. You've earned it, Henry." After we hung up, I walked out to the porch and sat with a blanket over my legs. The night was cold, but the stars were bright, brighter than they'd been in years. I thought about everything that had happened, every lie, every betrayal, every small victory. I thought about Linda and how she'd always believed I had more fight in me than I realized. Maybe she'd been right. I stayed outside until dawn, watching the first rays of light spill over the horizon. The world looked new again, washed clean, ready for something better. For once, I didn't feel old. I felt awake. When the sun rose fully, I made myself another cup of coffee and wrote one final line in my notebook for the day. "I can't change the son I raised, but I can choose the man I become." And for the first time, that felt like enough. A week after Megan's visit, I received a letter from the district attorney's office confirming the court date for Ryan's criminal trial. Seeing his name printed beside words like fraud, forgery, and elder abuse felt surreal. I never imagined my son's life would come to this. The same boy who once begged me to take him fishing on Saturdays was now facing a sentence that could steal years from his future. Yet as painful as it was, I knew it was necessary. Justice had a cost, and sometimes it was paid in bloodlines. The morning air was sharp as I stood by the mailbox, the letter clutched in my hand. Across the street, a few neighbors pretended not to watch me. News travels fast in small Florida towns. I could almost hear the whispers. "That's the man who took his own son to court." I didn't care. What they didn't understand was that this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the piece of myself I'd lost the day I stopped saying no. Inside, I placed the letter neatly on the kitchen table beside my notebook. The garden outside shimmered with dew sunlight filtering through the oak branches. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel proud of surviving something that could have destroyed me. But peace, I was learning, didn't come easily. It had to be defended, just like dignity. That afternoon, Nora called. "Henry, I wanted to update you. The DA's office will want you to testify again, this time for the criminal case. They'll need you to confirm the pattern of manipulation loans, forged documents, the guardianship attempt. It'll be emotional, but you'll do fine." "I'll tell the truth," I said. "That's all I've ever done." She hesitated before replying. "Megan's agreed to a plea deal. She's turning over more evidence emails, fake bank statements, even recordings of Ryan planning the forgery. She'll testify against him in exchange for reduced sentencing." I closed my eyes. "So it's her word now?" "No," Nora said firmly. "It's yours and hers. Together, it's bulletproof." That night, I couldn't sleep. I poured myself a small drink and sat by the window, the moonlight reflecting off the ocean in the distance. I'd spent decades building a life on trust, trusting my wife, trusting my son, trusting that family meant safety. But now, that same trust had nearly cost me everything. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Megan again, this time escorted by a probation officer. She looked smaller somehow. Her posture collapsed under invisible weight. "I only came to tell you something before the trial," she said, her voice fragile. The officer stayed by the gate as she continued. Ryan doesn't think you'll testify. He still believes you'll protect him. He told his lawyer that you'll never let your only son go to prison. I studied her face for a long moment. And what do you believe? She swallowed hard. I believe you'll do the right thing, even if it hurts. There was something almost sincere in her eyes, something stripped of manipulation. Perhaps for the first time, she wasn't performing. I already lost him, I said quietly. But I won't lose myself again. She nodded, tears glistening. He doesn't understand what he's done, Henry. He keeps blaming everyone else, me, the system, even you. But maybe prison is the only thing that can make him face it. Maybe, I murmured. Or maybe it'll just teach him to hide better. As she turned to leave, I called out, Megan, when you testify, tell the truth. Not for me, not even for Ryan, for yourself. You deserve to stop lying. She nodded without turning around and walked away with the officer. When she was gone, I sat on the porch and watched the wind move through the trees. The leaves rustled like whispers, soft, persistent, honest. I wondered if forgiveness could ever find its place among all this wreckage. The following week, I met with the prosecutors. They went over the timeline, the exhibits, the questions I'd likely face on the stand. The lead prosecutor, a tall woman named Sarah Green, looked at me with quiet respect. You've done something very few people can do, she said. You confronted betrayal without losing your integrity. I almost did, I admitted. But losing my integrity would have meant letting them win twice. She smiled faintly. That's exactly what the jury needs to hear. The trial began on a Monday morning. The courthouse was busier this time, cameras flashing outside as reporters crowded the steps. Nora walked beside me, her calm presence steadying me as we passed through security. Inside, Ryan was already seated at the defense table. He looked thinner, his hair shorter, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, he didn't look angry, just tired, hollow, like a man who'd finally run out of lies. The proceedings were long and painful. Megan testified first. She spoke softly, her voice breaking more than once as she described how she and Ryan had planned everything. How he convinced her it was just paperwork, how the debts had piled up, how greed turned into panic. At one point she looked at me and said, I told him it was wrong. He said his father wouldn't fight back. Ryan didn't look at her. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, knuckles white. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom seemed to fade into silence. I took the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Sarah guided me gently through the questions, starting with my relationship with Ryan. He was my only child, I said, my voice steady. I loved him more than anything. I gave him everything I could. But somewhere along the way, he started to believe that love meant ownership. She asked about the forged documents, the guardianship petition, the manipulation. I answered each question carefully, presenting the facts like stepping stones across a river of pain. When she played the recordings, the audio of Megan's voice, the conversation in my kitchen, the words, he won't remember a thing. The jury's faces hardened. Then came the defense's turn. Ryan's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man with a rehearsed air of sympathy, tried to paint me as a controlling father, unwilling to let go of power. Mr. Whitman, he said, would you say your son's actions were the result of financial pressure rather than malice? No, I said simply. He had choices. We all do. The lawyer leaned forward. You're asking this court to believe your son intended to destroy you. I met his gaze. I'm not asking them to believe anything. I'm just telling them what happened. There was a pause. The courtroom felt suspended in that moment. No noise, no motion, just the truth hanging in the air like a blade. When I stepped down from the stand, Ryan finally looked at me. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. By the third day of the trial, it was over. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, 10 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 6, Ryan's shoulders sagged. Megan cried softly in her seat, though no one reached to comfort her. As the guards approached to escort him out, Ryan turned to me one last time. "Dad," he said quietly, "you really did it." "I didn't," I replied. "You did." He nodded once, then lowered his head as they led him away. Outside, the sun was blinding, just as it had been the day of the first hearing. Nora stood beside me, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. "You did what had to be done," she said. I looked at the courthouse doors, still swinging shut behind the people who'd just destroyed the last of my family ties. "Yes," I said softly, "but I don't know if I'll ever stop wishing I hadn't needed to." That night I wrote in my notebook, "Justice doesn't heal. It only stops the bleeding long enough for you to start living again." Then I closed it, turned off the light, and let the darkness feel like peace instead of punishment for the first time in years. It had been 3 weeks since the sentencing, yet the quiet still didn't feel normal. The house no longer echoed with tension, but with something else, absence. After years of living under manipulation, I'd grown used to noise, the constant phone calls, the guilt-ridden arguments, the demands disguised as concern. Now there was only stillness, and though it brought relief, it also forced me to face the truth of how empty things had become. Every morning I woke before sunrise, out of habit more than need. I brewed a pot of coffee, fed the stray cat that had adopted my porch, and read the paper without really seeing the words. My mind kept replaying that final moment in the courtroom. Ryan's voice saying, "You really did it." I didn't know if he meant it as blame or acknowledgement, and maybe it didn't matter anymore. I thought about visiting him just once to see for myself if the prison walls had stripped away his arrogance or just hardened it. But every time I picked up the phone to ask Nora how to schedule a visit, I froze. Some wounds shouldn't be reopened too soon. One afternoon, as I was trimming the rose bushes, a familiar voice called from the driveway. "You've still got the best-looking garden in town, Mr. Whitman." It was Detective Harris. He looked more relaxed than he had during the investigation, his jacket slung over one shoulder. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course not," I said, setting down my shears. "Coffee's fresh." We sat on the porch, the late afternoon light washing everything in gold. Harris sipped his drink and leaned back. "Just wanted to let you know that the DA's office closed the case officially this week. Megan started her community service, and Ryan's appeal was denied. It's over." The words hit me harder than I expected. It's over. For months, I'd lived on adrenaline, on anger and purpose. Now, with no fight left to wage, I didn't know what came next. "Thank you," I said finally. "For everything you did?" He nodded. "You did most of the heavy lifting. Most men your age would have folded, especially when it's family." "I almost did," I admitted. But I realized something the moment I stopped protecting him. I finally started protecting myself. Harris smiled faintly. "That's the kind of wisdom we could use more of." When he left, I watched his car disappear down the street. The air felt lighter. I walked to the back garden where Linda's favorite bench still stood beneath the magnolia tree. I sat down and whispered, "It's done, sweetheart." The wind stirred the leaves, scattering sunlight through the branches. I took it as her answer. Days began to fall into a rhythm. I joined a small community group for retirees, gardening, storytelling, and Tuesday morning breakfasts at the diner. It was strange at first talking about ordinary things after months of courtroom drama, but the normalcy was healing in its own quiet way. People didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with respect. One Tuesday, as I was leaving the diner, a woman in her 60s approached me. "You're Henry Whitman, right? I saw your name in the paper." I hesitated, unsure if she meant it kindly. Yes, that's me. She smiled gently. I wanted to thank you. My sister went through something similar. Her son tried to get power of attorney over her house. She saw your case on the news. It gave her the courage to stand up for herself. Her words left me stunned. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. I'm glad I managed. Tell her she's not alone. As she walked away, I felt something stir inside me, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe what I'd gone through wasn't just punishment. Maybe it could mean something. That night, I called Nora. You still do those legal seminars at the senior center, I asked. Twice a month, she said. Why I want to help? I told her. Not as a lawyer, obviously. Just talk to people. Tell them what to watch out for, what manipulation looks like when it wears a smile. She didn't hesitate. That's a damn good idea, Henry. I'll get you on the next session. The following week, I stood in front of 20 or so people, men and women my age, some younger, each one carrying a different kind of worry in their eyes. I told them my story carefully, without bitterness. I told them how betrayal doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes with polite words and forged signatures. I told them that silence helps no one except the guilty. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a woman in the front row raised her hand. How did you know it was time to stop forgiving? I thought for a moment. When forgiveness started costing me my self-respect, I said. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was sincere. Afterward, several people came up to thank me, to share their stories. Some cried. Some simply nodded. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't in years useful. A few days later, I received a letter from the prison. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The handwriting was Ryan's, neat, deliberate, the same way he used to sign his school essays. Dad, it began. I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know that I've been going to the counseling sessions they offer here. The therapist asked me when things started going wrong, and for the first time, I told the truth. It started when I decided your money mattered more than your love. I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven, but I'm starting to understand what that word really means. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside Linda's photo. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply felt something settle quietly inside me, like dust finding its place after years of chaos. The next morning, I went to the beach. It was early, the sky still streaked with pink and gray. I walked along the shore, the waves brushing against my shoes. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to fix other people, Linda. When she was sick, Ryan, when he was lost, somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to fix myself. Now, with every step on that sand, I felt lighter. The tide erased my footprints as fast as I made them, as if reminding me that some things are meant to be left behind. When I got home, I wrote in my notebook again. You can't rewrite the past, but you can choose what it teaches you. That evening, as I watered the garden, I noticed something new, tiny buds pushing through the soil where nothing had grown for years. Linda used to call it life's stubbornness. I smiled. The phone rang just as I came inside. It was Nora again. Henry, you might want to turn on Channel 7, she said. I did. The local news was covering a segment about elder financial abuse, using my case as an example of justice served. The anchor ended with a line that made me pause. Mr. Whitman's courage has inspired a new awareness campaign across the state, encouraging seniors to speak up before it's too late. I sat back stunned. For once, my story wasn't about loss, it was about warning others. Maybe that was Linda's final gift. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of magnolias through the window. I looked around the quiet house and realized that peace had finally stopped feeling like loneliness. It felt like freedom. And for the first time since all of it began, I whispered out loud, "I'm going to be all right." 2 months passed before I saw Ryan again. It wasn't planned, at least not by me. The prison had organized a rehabilitation program for family reconciliation, and Nora thought I should consider attending. "Closure isn't just about justice, Henry," she said over the phone. "Sometimes it's about hearing what you need to hear, even if it hurts." I resisted at first. The idea of sitting across from the son who had tried to erase me from my own life felt unbearable. But as the days passed, something inside me shifted. Avoiding him hadn't brought peace. It had only left a hollow space that kept echoing. So I agreed. On a gray Thursday morning, I drove to the correctional facility. The air smelled of rain and the clouds hung low over the highway. At the entrance, a guard led me through the standard checks metal detector's ID scans, the cold click of locked doors opening and closing. When we reached the visitation room, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. Ryan was already there, sitting at a small table in the center of the room. He looked older, thinner, the arrogance stripped from his posture. When he saw me, he stood slowly. "Dad," he said. His voice was quiet, uncertain. I didn't answer right away. I studied his face, the same eyes that used to light up when he brought me report cards, as a boy now dulled by regret. Finally, I nodded and took a seat. "You wanted to talk," I said. He sat too, folding his hands in front of him. "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I." He gave a short, nervous laugh. "I don't even know where to start. I guess 'I'm sorry' doesn't begin to cover it." "It doesn't." I said, my tone calm but firm. "But it's a start." He looked down, tracing the edge of the table with his fingers. "You know, when they locked me up, I kept telling myself it was all your fault. That you ruined my life. It took months before I realized you were the only one who ever tried to save it." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I've been in therapy," he said. "They make us talk about accountability, about patterns. I used to think manipulation was survival, something I learned from watching how Mom handled you. She'd guilt you into everything. And I picked it up like a language. Hearing him say it aloud was like reopening an old wound. Your mother wasn't a bad person," I said carefully. "She just didn't know how to stop controlling things. And neither did I. I let it happen." He nodded. "I know. That's the part that haunts me the most. You gave me everything, and I turned it into entitlement." There was a long silence. Outside, rain began tapping against the narrow windows. For the first time since his arrest, I didn't see my son as an enemy. I saw him as a man trying to crawl out of his own wreckage. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "But I want to earn a life that means something again, even if it's small." I leaned back, exhaling. Earning something is all any of us can do. But forgiveness isn't about you, Ryan. It's about me letting go of the hate. He looked up, surprised. "You hate me," I did, I admitted, "for a long time. Not for what you did, but for making me believe I was weak enough to deserve it." He blinked, hard eyes glistening. "You never deserved any of it." The words hit me deeper than I expected. For years I'd carried guilt like a shadow guilt, for being too lenient, for raising him wrong, for failing to see the signs. Hearing him acknowledge it felt like air finally reaching my lungs again. "I've been working in the prison garden," he said suddenly, eager to fill the silence. "They let us plant vegetables, herbs, even a few flowers. I thought about you the first time I saw the soil turn. It reminded me of home." I smiled faintly. "Your mother always said the garden was the only place where truth couldn't hide." He smiled back, small but genuine. Maybe she was right. For the next hour, we talked not about the trial, not about the money, but about the simple things. Music, books, the weather. It was awkward at times, but strangely human. When the guard announced the end of visiting hours, Ryan stood and looked at me with something close to peace. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You didn't have to." "I know," I replied. "That's why it matters." He nodded, then hesitated. "Dad, do you think there's a version of us where things go differently?" I looked at him, this broken man who was once my little boy, and said softly, "Maybe not differently, but better. And better starts now." As I walked out of the facility, the rain had stopped. The sky had cleared, leaving the world washed and new. I stood by the parking lot for a moment, breathing in the damp air. I couldn't explain it, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't absolving him, but I was no longer chained to him either. Back home, I found myself in the garden again. The roses were still blooming, stubborn as ever. I knelt down, brushing the petals gently with my fingertips. For the first time in years, I felt something like gratitude, not for what had happened, but for having survived it. That evening, Nora called. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I thought," I said. "Worse than I hoped." She chuckled softly. "That's life." I told her about the conversation, about the therapy, the garden. She listened quietly, then said, "You know, Henry, you've done more than fight for your property. You fought for your dignity and won. That's no small thing." "I guess," I said. "But winning feels strange when the person you beat was your own son." "Maybe it's not about beating him," she replied. "Maybe it's about teaching him what losing integrity costs." After we hung up, I sat in my study with my notebook open. I wrote slowly, deliberately, as if each word needed to earn its place. Redemption doesn't erase the past. It just proves it doesn't have to own the future. As I set down the pen, I looked toward Linda's photo on the mantel. Her smile seemed softer now, as if she approved. Later that night, unable to sleep, I stepped outside. The sky was clear, the stars sharp against the dark. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint hum of cars on the highway and the rhythmic chirp of crickets. Life was moving forward, indifferent, but constant. I whispered into the stillness, "I forgive you, Ryan." The words didn't feel dramatic. They didn't come with tears or trembling. They felt simple, necessary, like closing a door after years of leaving it open to the storm. When I went back inside, I poured myself a glass of water and looked around the quiet house. Every corner, every scar on the walls, every echo carried history. But none of it hurt anymore. I turned off the lights, letting the darkness settle like a blanket. And for the first time since the betrayal began, I slept without dreams. The following months unfolded quietly, almost peacefully, like the slow healing of an old wound. The chaos had ended, but what came after felt unfamiliar, a kind of silence that demanded I build something new within it. The garden became my compass. Every morning I worked the soil, trimming, planting, nurturing. Each bud that pushed through reminded me that life didn't end just because something or someone broke it. One late afternoon, as I was watering the hydrangeas, my neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, leaned over the fence. "You're quite the local celebrity now, Henry," she teased with a smile. "They were talking about you on the radio again this morning. Something about a new community initiative for elder protection." I laughed softly. "Celebrity is a strong word, Margaret. I just did what anyone would have done." She shook her head. "No, most wouldn't. Most would have stayed quiet and lost everything. You didn't." Her words lingered after she left. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the letterhead Nora had sent me weeks ago, stationery, from the Elder Financial Justice Foundation. She had helped start it using the public attention from my case. They wanted me to share my story in workshops, to travel occasionally to help educate others. For years, I'd avoided crowds, avoided telling people too much. Now I was being asked to use my voice. The next morning, I called Nora. "I'll do it," I said simply. "Henry," she said, a smile in her voice. "That's wonderful. You're going to change lives." "I'm not trying to change lives," I said. "I just want people to stop losing theirs to greed disguised as family." She chuckled softly. "Sometimes that's exactly what changing lives looks like." The first event took place in Tampa. A modest auditorium filled with retirees, caregivers, and volunteers. When I walked onto the small stage, applause filled the room. I wasn't used to that kind of attention. For a moment, I froze. Then I took a breath and began to speak. "I'm not a lawyer or a social worker," I said. "I'm just a man who trusted his family too much. I thought love meant saying yes. But sometimes love means saying no and meaning it." As I spoke, faces in the crowd nodded, some with tears in their eyes. I told them everything: the forged documents, the manipulation, the loneliness that followed, and the slow, painful work of reclaiming my life. I didn't try to make it sound noble. It wasn't. It was survival. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment before applause erupted again, loud, sustained, full of something deeper than admiration. After the talk, an older woman approached me. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "My son's been trying to get me to sign over my house," she whispered. "I kept thinking I was being paranoid. But now I know I'm not crazy." I reached for her hand. "You're not crazy. You're just finally seeing clearly." As she walked away, I realized that maybe Nora had been right. Maybe I was changing lives one honest conversation at a time. In the weeks that followed, the foundation expanded its outreach. We began holding educational sessions across Florida, then Georgia, and the Carolinas. Nora handled the legal framework while I focused on the human side. The stories, the emotional traps that made people surrender their control. Every city brought new faces, new stories of betrayal, of courage, of rebuilding. Sometimes when I lay in my hotel room at night, I thought of Ryan. I wondered if he knew what I was doing, if he'd heard about the foundation. He had another year before his first parole review, and the prison counselor occasionally sent updates through Nora. Apparently, he'd kept his promise to stay in therapy. He was working as a peer mentor in the rehabilitation program, teaching financial responsibility to other inmates. The irony wasn't lost on me. One morning, I received a letter at the foundation office. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful, deliberate. I opened it and felt my chest tighten as I read. "Dad, they told me about what you're doing. I saw an article in the paper with your name and picture. I'm proud of you. I don't expect forgiveness, but knowing you're helping others makes me believe maybe I can help too in my own way. I've been volunteering to help new inmates write letters home. Some haven't spoken to their families in years. I hope you're well. Ryan." I sat with that letter for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. The words weren't elaborate or emotional, but they carried something real: ownership, humility, maybe even love. That evening, I wrote back. "Ryan, I read your letter. Thank you for writing. I'm glad you're finding ways to use what you've learned to do something better. I won't pretend everything is fine between us, but I don't need to. You're doing the right thing, and that's enough for now. Keep working. Keep growing. And when you get out, start fresh, not as my son, trying to make up for the past, but as a man who learned what it costs to lose himself. Dad." I mailed it the next morning without rereading it. It felt right to let the words stand as they were: honest, imperfect human. The next event took me to Jacksonville. The foundation had organized a larger conference there, partnering with state agencies and nonprofits. Reporters were present, cameras flashing as I spoke about the danger of manipulation that hides behind love. Family, I said during my closing remarks, is supposed to be a shelter. But sometimes it's the storm. The hardest part isn't surviving. It's deciding you still believe in kindness afterward. The audience rose to their feet. I didn't feel pride. I felt clarity. After the event, I drove back home alone, the coastal highway stretching endlessly ahead. The sun was low, painting the horizon in gold. I thought about Linda and how she used to say that every ending was just a quieter kind of beginning. Maybe she'd been right all along. When I arrived home, the garden was waiting. The roses had begun to fade, replaced by wildflowers that had seeded themselves naturally. I knelt down and touched the petals, soft and imperfect. Life kept finding its way forward no matter how much was broken. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a glass of tea and looked out at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered like fragments of hope. Somewhere miles away, my son was trying to rebuild himself. And here I was rebuilding too. I whispered into the darkness, maybe this is what forgiveness really looks like. Not forgetting, but choosing to keep living. A warm breeze rustled the magnolia tree. The sound reminded me of Linda's laughter, of the years we spent building this life together, of everything that had led me to this moment. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel haunted by what was lost. I felt guided by what remained. When I went inside, I opened my notebook and wrote, "You can survive betrayal. But healing begins when you use your pain to build something good." I closed it, turned off the lamp, and let the house rest in gentle quiet. The storm was gone. What lingered now wasn't fear or even sadness. It was peace, the kind you earn, not the kind you're given. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, painting thin stripes of gold across my kitchen table. The house smelled of coffee and lemon polish. Outside, the sea breeze moved through the magnolia tree, making the wind chimes sing softly. It had been 6 months since the trial ended, and life had settled into something that almost felt new. Not exciting, not dramatic, just steady. Peaceful in a way I didn't know peace could be. I sat down with my notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page. I'd been doing that every morning since everything ended. Some people pray. I write. It keeps the memories from turning into ghosts. I wrote, "Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in when you've stopped waiting for it." Then I closed the notebook and reached for my coffee just as a letter slid through the mail slot. The envelope was plain, official looking. I turned it over before opening it. The return address made my stomach tighten, Florida Department of Corrections. I took a slow breath and broke the seal. "Mr. Whitman," it began. "This notice is to inform you that your son Ryan Whitman will be eligible for supervised release in 3 months pending final review." I read it twice. My heart didn't race this time. There was no anger left, no dread. Only a quiet kind of acceptance. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table beside my notebook. For the first time since all of it began, I didn't feel like running from the truth. Later that day, I drove to the community center, where the Elder Financial Justice Foundation had set up its new office. Nora was already there, standing by the whiteboard with her usual energy. "You're late," she teased. "I had mail," I said. "Bad or good, neither," I replied. "Just life continuing." She smiled, the kind of smile only someone who's seen every side of you can give. "We've got a new batch of volunteers. You up for leading the orientation?" I nodded. "Let's get to it." The room filled slowly. Retirees, single parents, a few younger folks who'd seen their families go through similar things. I stood at the front, nervous, as always, before speaking. But as soon as I began, the words came easily. I used to think love meant saying yes, I told them. But sometimes love means saying no and not apologizing for it. A woman in the front row nodded, her eyes glassy. A man in the back took notes furiously. I told them about manipulation that hides behind kindness, about the way silence becomes permission. You can't control what people do, I said. But you can control when you stop allowing it. When the session ended, people stayed behind to talk. A few hugged me. One woman whispered, "I've been waiting for someone to tell me it's not my fault." I squeezed her hand and said it never was. By the time I left, the sky had turned the color of honey. I drove home with the windows down, the wind carrying the scent of salt and sun-warmed pavement. On the passenger seat sat another envelope Nora had given me earlier that day. "It's from Ryan's counselor," she'd said. I opened it when I got home. The counselor's letter was brief. Ryan had completed every rehabilitation program offered: financial accountability, anger management, peer mentoring. He has expressed remorse and awareness, the note read. He often says he's not seeking forgiveness, only a chance to live differently. I sat for a long while staring at the page. Then I whispered into the empty room, "Maybe that's enough." The next morning I found another envelope waiting on the porch. This one was handwritten. The moment I saw the handwriting, I knew it was Ryan's. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. "Dad," it began, "I don't know if you'll read this, but they told me about what you're doing, the foundation, the talks, helping people like us. I'm proud of you. I've been teaching classes here, helping other inmates write letters home. Some haven't spoken to their families in years. Maybe it's small, but it's something good. I hope when I get out, I can volunteer with you. I don't expect words. Maybe just a chance to plant something new." I read it 3 times before setting it down. Then I went outside to the garden. The morning light was bright, almost blinding. I knelt by the magnolia tree and began digging a small hole. The earth was soft, rich. I planted a young sapling beside the roots of the old tree. It wasn't symbolic on purpose, but maybe everything becomes symbolic when you've lived long enough to understand patterns. As I brushed the dirt from my hands, I looked up and whispered, "It's never too late, son." Later that afternoon, Nora stopped by to drop off paperwork. She saw the new tree and smiled. "You never stop planting, do you? Maybe I just finally learned what grows." "When you stop feeding bitterness," I said. She nodded, setting her briefcase down. "You've changed, Henry. You used to sound angry even when you were calm. Now you sound free." I poured her a cup of tea. Freedom's expensive, but worth every penny. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in pink and gold. The sound of waves rolled faintly from the shore. For the first time, I felt no need to talk about the past. The silence between us was easy, comfortable. As evening fell, I picked up my notebook again. I wrote one final entry for the day. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let the pain define the rest of your life. Then I closed it and leaned back in my chair. The house lights glowed softly behind me, the magnolia leaves rustling in the wind. I thought about Linda, about the promise I made at her grave months ago, to keep living, to make something good out of what was broken. I thought about Ryan, about the man he used to be, and the one he might still become. I realized something then. Life doesn't always give you happy endings, but it gives you the power to write honest ones. And that's more than enough. I looked out toward the ocean where the sky was folding into night and spoke softly, not to anyone in particular. We all make mistakes. Some of us pay longer than others. But if you've ever been hurt by the people you trusted most, remember this, it doesn't end there. You still have the power to stand, to rebuild, to forgive on your own terms. I smiled faintly, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my bones. I raised my cup of tea toward the horizon. "Tell me," I said almost to myself, "what would you have done in my place?" The question hung in the air, quiet but inviting. Then after a pause, I added softly, "If stories like mine mean something to you, stay a while. Share your thoughts, subscribe, and let's keep these stories alive because you never know who might need to hear them next." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of roses through the open window. I leaned back in my chair as the stars began to appear one by one, their light reflecting off the magnolia leaves. And for the first time in years, I felt no weight, no waiting, only peace.